Hi, I'm Andy Jones, content editor for Plaid's online education program, and today we're going to be painting lemons, so there's no reason to be a sourpuss. Come on, let's paint. I painted this little design of lemons on a tray that I found at a local craft store. As you can see, my tray had two different colors of wood, so I thinned out some FolkArt burnt umber acrylic and just brushed that on the surface and wiped it back with a paper towel, and then darkened the edge with a little extra burnt umber so that my tray has an even overall wood tone to it. Then I transferred my design using chalk, and we're going to simply start by base coating our lemons using yellow ochre. Don't put your brush in water to start, because that's just going to make our paint thin and more transparent and just take longer to dry. So no water on the brush. Load your brush with yellow ochre, and we're going to begin to paint the large lemon in the back. You'll use your brush stroke skills to form a nice sharp edge on the lemon, and feel free to turn your work as you paint. We're going to fill in the outside edge before we fill in the center. Again, using your brush control, get a much sharper edge by sliding around than I would if I were trying to paint the outside edge of the lemon like that. You gotta use a little thought power when you're painting. Figure out what's going to give you the best effect for the least amount of work. We'll paint the little end of the lemon, and now I'll simply fill in the lemon using the yellow ochre FolkArt acrylic paint, and I'm sort of using a patting motion as I'm applying the paint so that it can fill in the pores of the wood. Now, yellows are notoriously bad to cover, so we might have to apply 2 coats of yellow ochre on here so that we have a nice even coverage of paint, but that's okay. I'm going to come back and try to fill in some of these little pores of the wood with some paint. And so again, using basic brush strokes, just gonna fill in the shape of the lemon. Okay, that's good enough for right now on the back lemon. So I'm going to come and fill in the rind on the cut lemon. Again, using the brush strokes that I hope you've been practicing. Once you get control of your flat brush, it's very easy to go from a wide area, and I'm using a 1/2 inch flat brush here. You might want to use something that's a little bit smaller, but with practice you can control going from a wide area to a very narrow area, and it's very efficient to paint that way. So repeatedly you'll hear me talk about practicing your flat brush strokes, and it's so that you are in control of the brush. It's difficult to paint when you want the brush to do something and you haven't practiced enough to make the brush do exactly what you want. So practice those skills and learn to control the flat brush. So that's still just a little bit sticky. I'm going to risk putting a second coat on it, just to show you how much better the coverage is with the second coat. So you can obviously see that you get a much more opaque coverage by adding the second coat to the lemon. If your undercoat is not completely dry, you may want to wait until it is. I'm working pretty quickly and using a light touch, so I'm not likely to dig a hole in the paint. If you're a little slower and have a heavier hand, let your first coat dry completely before you start to apply a second coat to the lemon. And then we'll come back to the cut lemon and we'll give it a second coat. This is a nice little study of citrus fruit, so you get to paint the texture of the skin of the lemon and then all of the detail of the cut section of the citrus fruit. You'll notice that I keep moving the surface around so that it's comfortable for me to paint. Your surface isn't nailed down, so you can move it, so take advantage of that. Okay, now I'm going to I had put out a bunch of paint and did not yet put out any burnt umber because I want to paint the little sections of my lemon with some yellow ochre plus just a little bit of burnt umber. So I'm going to mix that color together, and I want you to pay attention that the lemon is anything but yellow. Sometimes you'll make an association that, oh, it's a lemon, so it's just got to be yellow. But we're going to paint our lemon using some different colors so that we add some interest to our painting. So I'm just going to fill in those sections with this kind of darker yellow color. Just work neatly and carefully, painting one section at a time. I want you to notice that when I'm trying to paint a sharp edge, I usually have the chisel edge of my brush next to it, or I'm painting a smooth stroke. I want you to start to be a strategic painter and thinking about how it's going to be the easiest way to paint something. So the two sides of the section, use the flat edge or the chisel edge of the brush right against that section, and then the stroke of the brush across the back. Turn your work so that again you're putting the chisel edge next to your line and then stroking across the back section. If you always try to think a little bit ahead when you're painting, it can save you a lot of time and trouble. And notice I keep moving the tray around, and that might be a little bothersome as you're watching the video, but I think it gives you a very good idea about just how much I move the work surface so that it's easier for me to paint. It's all about making painting comfortable, mastering control of the flat brush, and learning how to use it to your advantage. There are quite a few little sections to a lemon. They're all painted the same way, using the chisel edge of the brush against the outside edge, and then a nice stroke across to fill it in. And there's nothing probably less fun than to watch someone base coat something, but it's all a part of painting and you have to learn all of these techniques. So the last section, once again, is the chisel edge of the brush, stroke across the back, turning it to make it comfortable. Okay, and now we have the pulpy sections of the lemon filled in. I'm going to rest my brush in my brush basin, and I'm going to pick up a liner brush. This is a number 2 liner brush. I'm going to wet it, blot it on my paper towel, and I'm going to pick up some titanium white, move it to a spot on the palette because I'm going to brush mix the color for the flesh of the lemon. So some white, a little bit of yellow ochre, and a little bit of burnt sienna. And this is kind of a ochre tan color. So I'm going to pull the brush to a point. And I'm not painting fine lines with this, so I don't need my paint to be an ink-like consistency. It just needs to be thin enough to flow off of the brush. And this requires a little bit of practice, a little bit of skill holding the liner brush, but we're just going to begin to fill in the flesh of the lemon using our liner brush. Turn your work surface as you need to, and a nice steady hand. If you are a beginning painter and you're thinking to yourself, I can't do that, I don't know how he can do that, he makes it look so easy. I'm hoping that I make it look easy. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I have practiced and practiced and practiced. And when you practice, you'll be able to do it too. It's not hard, it just requires a little effort. Alright, so now I'm going to come from one outside edge of the section and right up toward the center, rounding off that section and coming right up to the center. Just take your time, you'll be able to do this. So I'm going to round this section off and come right up to the center and just work my way around the lemon. If you practice with your liner brush, you'll be able to do this. If you don't practice, you can do this, but it'll just be a little more difficult for you. So please take the time to practice. It's the only way that you'll become a better painter. I had a student one time who was complaining that she couldn't paint something, and she was telling me that she had read the books and she had watched videos and she had, you know, just wanted to do this forever and just can't do it. And I just asked her, I said, have you thought about practicing? I said, you can't get it just by watching it and reading about it. You actually have to practice. And eventually she caught on and she practiced and she became a beautiful painter. Anyone can learn to paint. How good a painter you become depends on how hard you practice and how much you want to be a good painter. Some people are happy with their first attempt at it, and that's absolutely fine. And some people want to be a master at it, and that's fine too. You just have to find the level that you want to work at and be comfortable with that. Okay, so we have this undercoated, and this needs this light pith area needs a second coat. So if you're working with me, now would be a good time to stop your video and catch up to this point and let your lemons dry. When we come back, I will have given this pith a second coat of paint. Alright, as I mentioned, I was giving the pith of the lemon a second coat of paint, and I've done that, and it's now dry. So we're going to start giving our lemon form, and we're going to create the form of the lemons through value change. So I'm going to side load my flat brush with dark color and apply shading to the lemon. So I've dipped my brush into water, blotted it on my paper towel, and I'm going to begin to stroke my brush into some burnt sienna. Want to sneak into the puddle of paint, then move onto my palette and begin to blend in place, softening the color across the brush, flip the brush over, put the dark color next to the dark color, and blend in place. Please pay attention to what you're doing as you flip your brush over. You want to create a nice soft gradient across the brush. Work only in one blending zone on your palette. Don't blend here and then blend here and then blend here, because that's just painting your palette and taking the paint out of your brush. Alright, so my brush has a nice gradient of color in it, but there's not much paint in my brush. So I want to pick up more paint, so I'm going to dip my brush into water, going to blot it on my paper towel, and come back to my pile of burnt sienna and pick up more paint and blend that into the brush. Now I'm using a rather large flat brush, but that's because I'm very comfortable side loading dark shading color on my brush and painting with a large brush in any given area. If you feel more comfortable with a slightly smaller brush, feel free to use that. This is a 1-inch flat brush. Alright, so my lemon is going to be the fattest right here. That's the point closest toward me if I were viewing an actual lemon. So I'm going to put shading on opposite sides of my brightest highlight area. So I'm going to start right along the outside edge of the lemon. I'm going to set my brush down and I'm going to begin to stroke this color on and pat the color as I'm applying it to the surface. My paint's a little dry, so I'm going to touch my brush to water, blot it on the paper towel, and then come back to my palette, blend in the same blending zone, come back to my lemon, and pat this color on. And I'm going to bring this color right down to the sliced lemon, just patting the color on. If I were to get some into that area, I can just wipe it out with my finger, no problem. So let's come back and apply a little bit more shading, and you see that I'm really patting the color onto the lemon. It's not a smooth, I don't want a smooth crescent of dark color. I want an irregular edge, and this is just water over here. This will dry and you won't see that edge there, but I do have a gradation of color across my brush, and it transfers beautifully onto the lemon. So picking up more paint, blending in my same blending zone, touch the brush to water, blot it on a paper towel, come back to that same zone. This is very therapeutic. Once you get the hang of this, it's so much fun to load up your brush and apply the shading to your fruit or whatever you're painting. So we're going to do the same thing on the bottom edge of the lemon. So just start, touch the brush down, apply the color to the edge of the lemon, patting and softening the color on. Pay attention to what you're doing so that you get the color all the way to the outside edge of the lemon. You don't want to leave a gap there. And then right up to the sliced fruit. Pat that a little bit. Then just come back and really apply some shading. You can't have nice bright highlights on a piece of fruit unless you have rich dark shading on there, because the dark shading allows your highlights to really pop. So I'm going to come back on here and just add a little bit more shading near the end of the lemon. Pat that on there. Use the surface of your flat brush so that you get a nice gradation of color on there. And just going to add a little bit of shading out here at the end of the lemon. If you feel like you've got too much shading, don't worry about it, because we're going to soften it when we begin to add our highlights. So sometimes my shading on things looks pretty ragged, and that's okay, because we're going to come back and we're going to cover that up. So again, I just keep my brush fully loaded with paint, and I keep my blending zone nice and wet. Alright, so this will be the fattest part of our cut lemon, so we're going to add shading on opposite sides of that. So I'm going to start here at the back of the lemon, touch, press, pat this dark shading on, bring it right up to the edge, and just soften it. Going to do the same thing on the other side of the sliced lemon. Touch the brush to the surface, slide it along, pat that dark shading on there. Got to turn this again so I can see what I'm doing. Sometimes it takes a little work to get a big brush in a small area, but when you do, it makes life much faster painting. Okay, so now that we have our dark shading on there, we need to let that completely dry before we start to develop our highlights. Alright, we've applied the shading to our lemon and we've let that completely dry. So now it's time to start developing the highlights on our lemon, and that's what's going to give the fruit its shape and form. I think of the first layer of highlight as really kind of cleaning up the shading. So with that thought in mind, I'm going to take a flat brush with no water, it's completely dry. I'm going to pick up some yellow ochre, and I want to move to a clean spot on my palette, and I want to load the brush with the yellow ochre, and I want a very small amount of paint on the brush so that when you look at your paintbrush, you can actually see the bristles through the paint. So there's a very small amount of paint on the brush, and the paint is almost dry. This is what we're going to call dry brushing, and you need to not put your brush in water. So I'm going to start where I want my highlight to be the brightest, which is right here in the middle of the lemon. I need actually a little bit more paint on my brush. And I'm just going to start scrubbing, and as I apply this thin film of paint, I want you to notice out here at these edges, the far edges of my highlight that are just about extending into my shading, you can see a little bit of this yellow ochre color feather into the shading, creating a very soft transition from burnt sienna to yellow ochre. And that's what you want to look for. This is what we're doing, is we're cleaning up the shading. So if you didn't like your shading, you got nothing to worry about, because we're cleaning it up right now. So we're starting where we want the highlight to be the brightest, and we're feathering this color out. And you can just see that I have nice irregular edges, which is what you want. So almost no paint on the brush, absolutely no water in the brush. We're going to begin where we want our highlight to be the brightest, and we're just going to scrub and feather this yellow ochre out into our sienna shading. So even on the little end of the lemon, picked up a little paint. Make sure that there's not too much on your brush, and here at the end I'm just going to scrub a little bit with the corner of my brush, and you can see how I've softened where my shading had almost come together there. Just have to plan ahead just a little bit. And now we've softened that shading, and I'm going to come over to the cut piece of fruit and do the same thing. We're going to work on both sections at the same time. So I'll start here where I want the highlight to be the brightest, and then scrub out toward the edges, and you can see what a nice soft transition we have now from dark shading to our yellow ochre. If you start to do this and you cover up too much of your sienna shading, or you don't like the way it turned out, don't worry about it. Just let this dry. You can come back and apply your shading again, and then repeat this step a second time, and you will have practiced and done a much better job. Now, this is virtually dry, so I'm just going to wipe out my brush, and I'm going to go to my next lighter color, which would be medium yellow. But that medium yellow is going to be too bright, so I need to do an intermediate step of yellow ochre plus medium yellow. So I'm just going to mix those colors together here on my palette, making sure that I don't have too much paint on my brush. I'm going to start saying the same thing over and over and over because I want you to really understand this process. I'm going to first check my color on my surface. It's impossible for the eye to judge what this color yellow is next to this color. You have to have the colors touching one another. So where I want my highlight to be the brightest, I'm barely going to put a little color down, and that's lighter. I can see that it's lighter. I want to make sure that I don't have too much paint on my brush, so I might wipe a little of the excess off, and I'm going to start here and feather this color out. Now, the yellow ochre that we used in the previous layer went out to here. This is not going out quite that far because I want each layer to cover slightly less area. So you've got to think lighter color, smaller area, feathered, fuzzy edge. The first layer of highlighting came out to there. This one's not coming out as far, and it's a lighter color. And we're just going to scrub this on. You can put pressure on one corner of the brush and then come back with pressure on the other corner of the brush. Just want to move in a crisscrossy motion. Loading my brush up, going to wipe the excess off, and I'm going to start here on the cut section of the lemon, right where I want the highlight to be the brightest. And we're going to, that's a little much paint on the brush because I can see it's not feathering easily. So I'm going to wipe the paint off the brush and come back and get a much softer edge there. So when you see something's going a little sideways on you, it's best to stop and correct the situation. Don't just think it's going to get better all by itself, because you're the one that's going to have to make it a little bit better. All right, now I'm going to pick up just some medium yellow on my brush, not too much paint. I'm going to take the excess paint off, and I'm going to come over here and make sure that that's dry and check my color. Looks good. So I'm going to begin where I want my highlight to be the brightest, and I'm going to feather this color out, covering a slightly smaller area. This highlight's going to go right up to the pith of the lemon there, and not so much down on the sides there. Again, you see me coming back to my palette. I'm picking up a minuscule amount of paint, and when I start in the area where I want it to be the brightest, and I'm watching carefully to make sure that the paint is feathering off of the brush. This is not a difficult technique to do. You just have to get comfortable with the amount of paint you have on your brush and how you're feathering the edges to have the lightest part right up there. So I've got a little bit more control, and then we simply feather that color out. And this time I'm going to add some lemon yellow to this. I had a half step between yellow ochre and medium yellow. Then I had just medium yellow. Now we're doing a half step between medium yellow and lemon yellow. Same small amount of paint on the brush. Start my highlight where I want it to be the brightest, and then feather the edges. We build form through changes in value. If you paint something a solid color, it's always going to look flat. But value changes create depth and dimension to whatever you paint. So again, checking to see that my color's lighter, which it is. Not too much paint on my brush, and I'm going to begin where I want that highlight to be the brightest. And we're going to feather this out, covering a slightly smaller area. But each layer that you add creates a better form. Just lemon yellow by itself. Take the excess paint off your brush. Begin where you want that highlight to be the brightest and feather those edges out. And once you really start to see the value change, you can see how this is creating a nice form to the fruit. We're going to start where we want our highlight to be the brightest. Use a little bit more paint that time. And then we're going to feather those edges out, covering a smaller area, building our lemon layer by layer, value by value. And this texture adds to the realism of the fruit, because a lemon peel is not smooth. It's nice and textured and bumpy when you really take the time to look at one. Okay, so now we've got a bright yellow there. So we're going to do another half step lighter, this time with lemon yellow plus some titanium white, and just brush mix a brighter yellow. Take the excess paint off your brush, check to see that you can see the bristles through the paint, and then I'm going to start where I want that highlight to be the brightest, and then feather that highlight out. And you can see now that I've added a little bit of white, you really start to get some action on how bright the highlights are. So again, just feather that out. And the technique is not difficult, you just have to be patient. One super thin layer that's a little bit lighter and a little bit smaller each time. I'm going to add some more titanium white, check to make sure that it's a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter, and start where I want that highlight to be the brightest, and just simply feather that color out. Each layer is lighter and smaller than the layer before, and we're just going to feather that color out. It's not difficult. Each layer takes up a little bit less room, so it goes a little faster the lighter you get. So I'm going to add a little bit more titanium white. So now I'm going to wipe my brush off really well, because I don't want my white to turn quite so yellow. We're never going to have a stark white highlight on here because there's always going to be a little bit of yellow in our brush. But that's getting pretty light there, and I think you get the idea that you have form that's now the lemon's not just a flat shape, it's a nice three-dimensional lemon. I can tell there's too much paint on my brush, so wipe the excess off. Now I can see the bristles. Push the brush down and just kind of feather it out, and you get a really nice highlight there. Okay, so if you've stayed with me this far, you understand that each layer is one value lighter and covers a smaller area. So at this point we need to let this dry, because there's a lot of layers of paint on there that are just almost dry but not quite. So you can pause your video and let your lemon dry. Alright, so we have developed our highlights and we've now let them dry completely. So I want to add the cast shadow from the cut piece of fruit onto the whole fruit. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of burnt sienna on my flat brush, and I want to add a very small amount of dioxazine violet to this, which is going to make that burnt sienna a nice rich shading color. Just brush mix those together, and I want to thin this down a little bit because I want my shadow to be somewhat transparent. Now that I've got my color the way I want it, I've thinned it down with just a little bit of water and loaded my brush, and I'm going to have to plan this out a little bit, because from the bottom of my shadow is going to come up to where the lemon would touch. So it's going to be right along that arc there, and so very carefully I'm going to touch my brush to the surface and just paint that cast shadow onto my lemon. And that's all there is to that. Just gonna leave it alone, not overwork it, except for this one little tiny area there. Okay, so that's the shadow from the cut piece of fruit onto our whole lemon. Now, let's shift over to painting the sections of the lemon. we're going to do this using a small flat brush and some yellow ochre with a little medium yellow. So brush mix that together, and I've got my little flat brush loaded. This is a number 6 flat, and I want to aim the section of fruit toward me because I'm going to work from the outside toward the center. And I'm just going to touch the brush to the surface, press and pull, and make these little, for lack of a better word, a little juice sac, which is like the little pulp of the lemon, and then skip the membrane and work to the next section. And don't line these up like little mouse tracks. You need to have some variation in them. Again, it's yellow ochre plus medium yellow, and they're just little dabs of the brush. And this time we're using the transparency of the yellow to our advantage so that you can see through them like they are actually translucent. We're just painting a suggestion of a realistic piece of fruit. We're not trying to do a piece of photorealistic painting here. So we're just given the suggestion of these little sacks of pulp or fruit or juice. Just dab them on. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. When I showed this painting to a coworker, they were commenting on how hard it must be to paint the center of that lemon, and I was like, no, it's just a few dabs of paint. And so now when they watch the video, they'll be like, oh, he was right, it is just a few dabs of paint. Okay, now I'm going to pick up some lemon yellow on the same flat brush. I didn't bother cleaning it out, just adding some yellow to it. If you feel like your yellow's getting lost, simply wipe it out on a paper towel. Don't add water to your brush. A lot of you will be very tempted to stick your brush in water all the time, and you really don't need to do that. So let's start again, and we're just going to add some lighter yellow to the sections of the lemon. You'll need fewer of these lighter sections. Again, we're using the inherent transparency of the paint to our advantage. Just dabbing these on, and we're getting the illusion of those little pulpy sacks of juice. Now I'm adding just a very small amount of white, and we're going to come and put fewer of these on just as some highlights. Don't need too many of these, just a few here and there in each section. And very simply, you've got a lovely piece of cut open citrus fruit. Just taking a look at what I've got here, and I think this one section here just needs a little additional help, so we'll come and add a little bit on that. And I'm really happy with the way that the sections look. So the next thing we need to do is we need to highlight the pith of the lemon and highlight the membranes a little bit. So I'm going to start with some titanium white and a very little bit of burnt sienna. That's way too dark, so I'm going to add some more white to it. This is where you notice that something's not right and you stop immediately and correct the situation before you go on. If I just continued to paint, I would have ended up with like a white stripe on the pith of the lemon, which is not what I wanted. So just want to make sure that that's lighter, and it is. So I'm just going to come and just dab some highlights on. Not trying to repaint it, but you can see where this is lighter. And just come around here, because this would be the brightest part next to the highlight on the lemon. This also gives me a chance to clean up the edge of that where the shading got a little messy. So we're going to come back and we're actually going to highlight the membrane between the sections. And this is done simply by dragging a little highlight along. Just move your work so that it's easier for you to control your brush. Softening that out at the edge and then just highlighting that membrane. Coming over here here, just dabbing a little bit of the highlight on, and then right down the center there. Do a little bit over here. Don't want to completely cover up that first color that we put on there, just want to highlight a little bit. Now, since I added the highlight where it was closer to the brighter part of our lemon, I need to add a little bit of shading onto that part over here where it has the cut surface. So I'm going to clean out my liner brush, and I'm going to pick up some burnt sienna and add a little yellow ochre to my burnt sienna and thin this color down a little bit and turn my surface, and I'm just going to begin to add some dark shading right along the cut edge of the lemon. And if I need to soften it, I can just dab it with my finger. Add a little bit more of that shading right along here. I'm adding a little bit more shading, and I'm just going to soften it real quickly with my finger. And I think that's all we need on the lemons. So what we need to add now is what's called a resting shadow. That's the shadow where the object is resting on the table. And I'm going to use just a little bit of water on a flat brush and some pure black FolkArt Acrylic. And I'm going to load the flat brush and blend on the palette to soften the color. This is just one side of the flat brush. And what I'm going to do is just come right up underneath the lemon and then a little bit along to give the illusion of kind of a table shadow. So let's start right where we want that to be the very darkest. There we go. So I'm just painting that shadow right next to the lemon. Just can give a little bit of a table line. So now I'm going to take a soft scruffy brush and I'm just going to pat that color out to soften it and remove any brush marks. So now I have a nice gentle shadow. Okay, let's move on to our other shadows. I'm going to continue this shadow here down to the midpoint of our cut piece of fruit. So paint on the brush, blending on the palette, creating that gradient, and then applying the paint right underneath the lemon. Just add a little extra color there to make that shadow darker. Then I'll pick up that scruffy brush and softly pat that color out. And this is a little bit too wide there, so let me take a flat brush with just a little bit of water on it, and hopefully I can come right in here and clean that up. Just a little bit of water, and I've stopped that shadow from being out of place. Now I have to add just a little bit of shadow back here so that we have an indication of a table, and I'm just going to start right next to the lemon and add a little suggestion of a table, and just a little bit down there. Okay, now once again with a little scruffy brush, just going to start to tap and soften that color out to soften the shadow. And I think I want to come in with a smaller flat brush this time and just clean up this little bit of shadow right there, so that we have a nice crisp edge to our lemon. And that's a beautiful study of cut citrus fruit. I had fun today teaching you the dry brush technique to build a highlight on your lemons. And it was also neat to add this little bit of an illusion of a shadow to the painting. I'd like to invite you to join our Facebook group, Let's Paint with Plaid, where you'll get up-to-the-minute information on all things Let's Paint. And be sure to visit plaidonline.com/Let's Paint, where you can get more information about Skill Builder videos, studio lessons, Let's Paint Live, and FolkArt One Stroke Flower of the Month with Donna Dewberry.